I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. John Avlon of CNN and the Daily Beast, and Tegan Goddard of Political Wire, my political roundtable, and we're going to do some politics. The word is neo-isolationism. Mr. Avlon uses it. I can use the old-fashioned isolationism. It's associated historically with the Republican Party, especially during the 1940 election, when FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, delaying his decision very late as to whether he was going to run for a third term, was accused of meddling or getting involved in the European affairs. We don't have anything to do with it. Since then, it's been a story in the Republican Party that there are these people called isolationists. We don't have anything to do with foreigners. No foreign entanglement. Well, it's back. Mr. Avlon, in observing the debate in New Hampshire, did you see this as a conscious development by the candidates that they were so reluctant to speak out, or was it that they all backed into it and we come to this theme afterwards?
I think it was partially calculated and partially an issue of momentum on the stage and in the room. And I think it does go to show how much partisan politics can affect the posturing of parties when it comes to even foreign policy. What you had in effect was a near across-the-board repudiation of the Bush Doctrine that was striking. In Mitt Romney's case, it was certainly not scripted. I mean, many of his advisors who are of the more neoconservative bent were apparently not so pleased that he appeared to jump on this bandwagon as well. The one person who's been consistent, although I disagree with him, you give him credit for it, is Ron Paul. But these fault lines run deep. I mean, the 1940 election you discussed, ultimately the nomination was won by Wendell Willkie, who ran against the isolationists. Correct. 1952, Eisenhower got in the race against Robert A. Taft because Taft represented the isolationist strain. It has been basically put to bed since then. And what you had in the Bush years is a neo-isolationist movement start to gain momentum on the far left in reaction to Iraq and Afghanistan, the Kucinich, the Kucinich wing of the Democratic Party. And then most recently, you had 87 Republicans back a Kucinich amendment on Libya. And if you overlay those Republicans with the folks who don't want to raise the debt ceiling, you have the portrait of a neo-isolationist movement. It's not only on the far right, but it's gathering steam. It is troubling, and it should make responsible Republicans very concerned.
Tegan, your thoughts about neo-isolationism. I follow John's line that they're not meeting on this to say, all right, we're going to give ourselves a great big neo-I on a placard, and we're going to go out there and speak of the doctrine of neo-isolationism. We'll put up a website. But they all disengaged from our foreign commitments in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also we could list, they didn't talk about China at all, and that's a major problem for the people of Asia and for our questions about our debt and about trade. And the Republicans are acting as if we're back in 1940 and we can only talk about America.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the point that John made earlier about linking both the neo-isolationist movement as well as the positioning on the national debt, the commonality that these things have is that they're both very, very difficult, and there are no easy answers for any of this. And they essentially, the Republican candidates are punting on this. They sense that Obama's vulnerable, but they don't have a solution either. And so the best solution is kind of to walk away from it.
And Romney's the one I'm going to lean on. Did you have any sense at all that Romney has a foreign policy, that he's thought about these things, that a man who has devoted himself to talking about health care defensively and talking about the economy offensively has sort of skipped out the commander-in-chief role?
Well, there was a former top aide to Mitt Romney up when he was governor of Massachusetts I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, and he said, and I asked a simple question, which is the real Mitt Romney? Was it the Mitt Romney who was governor of Massachusetts, or was it the Mitt Romney who ran in 2008, or is it this new emerging Mitt Romney who's running in 2012? And this is a person who worked very closely with Romney, and he said, I just don't know.
That should terrify everyone. I'm sorry.
It does. I mean, I have had an anecdote from a colleague, no names, who said that he sat with the candidate, and they talked foreign affairs, specifically. And the candidate listened and ingested and then passed the information on. Got it very quickly. Quick study. Smart guy, right?
Yeah, very.
But there was no impression that it was any different than any other information. And in fact, there was no impression that he had a policy beforehand. He was giving it back. And a man who regards foreign policy as a test that you pass in order to get on to your next graduate school class or something like that. Nothing that he's thought about. He's been in international business. He's been a man of national affairs for 20 or 30 years. And yet you would think that he was unaware of our commitments overseas.
Well, and that's consistent with, I think, the salesman approach to running for the presidency, which has been a hallmark of Romney to date, and really running for any office. He tries to figure out what information he needs to pass that particular test. What sale does he need to make? And if it's to a different constituency, he will shift his positions. And there's nothing wrong with it in his worldview because he's trying simply to make that sale. And he is very smart. And right now, I believe he's probably the most responsible guy in the Republican field. But that's why these answers and this lack of reflection on foreign policy is so concerning. And it was Woodrow Wilson who said, it would be irony if my presidency was primarily occupied by foreign affairs. Every presidency is primarily occupied by foreign affairs, and withdrawing from the world is simply not an option.
And right now, Tegan, I could be troublesome here and say that Mitt Romney will put this off until he hires John Bolton to be Secretary of State, and that will answer all our questions. The neocons will be back in charge.
Well, I think we see a Republican Party here that's a little bit broken after the Bush years, and they're trying to pick up the pieces and figure out who they are. It's not at all clear, and so there's a lot of different thoughts out there. There's a lot of different players. Romney's actually, in some ways, symptomatic of that problem because he's trying to be all things to all people.
Right now, the other candidate that we need to concern ourselves with, not Michelle Bachmann, is Tim Pawlenty, the governor of Minnesota, who was equally reluctant to speak of foreign affairs. Your sense of him, is he ready to be commander-in-chief, or is he just trying to solve the Romney problem right now, and he'll worry about the White House later?
I honestly think his failure to directly address his criticisms about Obamacare on stage, when John King pressed him, said, the man you criticized last weekend is on stage with you, repeat that attack. And he did not. I do think that ultimately is devastating because it shows a lack of backbone. It shows a lack of consistency and a willing to look a guy in the eye and repeat a line. And you can say it's because he's genial and just too nice a guy to pull it off, but that is a fundamental flaw. And he was very strong in a lot of areas, in particular right to work. Got a great applause lines. But that is a fundamental character test, and he did not pass it.
Tegan, does Pawlenty have time to recover from that, or is that burned in our minds, like the man who whiffed the first time up at the plate?
The primaries and caucuses aren't until next year, but this year is a primary and caucus for those who are going to be the anti-Mitt Romney candidate, and Pawlenty just lost the first one.
Yeah.
And in losing this, does that mean we entertain him for 16? We have another cycle coming up. He did okay this time.
Sure, the other explanation is that he's been running for VP all along, and Tegan's made great points in the past that it also is likely to hurt him in the money primary with the ending of the second quarter. And that can be devastating in terms of momentum for candidates in this year.
Right. The plain-dressed and plain-spoken pursuit of money. That is politics, and June 30th is the end of the second quarter, and we will look at how much Mr. Pawlenty raised before Manchester and after Manchester. Tegan Goddard, The Political Wire. John Avlon of CNN and the Daily Beast filing soon on all of these presidential candidates. I'm John Batchelor.